Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, our panel discussion. My name is Brenda Alacy. I handle DEI matters for the Buffalo Niagara Association of Realtors, and I'm also the Government Affairs Director. Really appreciate you all being here today about this important discussion. Allow me to introduce the panel quickly, and then we'll get rolling. To my far right is Brendan Thompson, who is with the Greater Rochester Area Association of Realtors. He is the Fair Housing Manager and has another title that doesn't fit on a business card, so we'll talk to him later about what else he does. But Brendan is very involved in matters of DEI as well. To my immediate right, Ines Latif, who is a longtime realtor, 21 years in the business, realtor and associate broker. Welcome, Brendan and Ines. To my left, Nanette D. Massey is with us. And Nanette is an anti-racism workshop facilitator, writer, and speaker, and we really appreciate you being here. And you all know John Leonardi, the BNAR CEO to our far left. Everybody, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. And we want to have, an open discussion. We have gift cards that are, cards, not gift cards, but cards on the chairs. We can make it a gift, I suppose. Cards on the chairs. If you have any questions that you would like to place on the file cards, and then bring them up to us. We want to talk about DEI. What does that mean? You hear a lot of alphabet soup things. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is kind of a trendy term that's used by many different companies of every ilk. And over the course of the 4 months that I've been with the BNAR, I've met with people who handle DEI from banks to medical practices to the Buffalo Niagara Medical Campus and the partnership. It's something that people are now focusing on. And from my experience, it's not been a moment too soon. So we want to talk from the heart, have a real conversation today. And we want to talk about the notion of invisibility. And John, I'll have you explain how that whole notion came about, and how we're going to introduce you to somebody a little bit later who has felt invisible.
So we talk about diversity, and sometimes people cringe. It's like a bad word, especially for white people. This is going to be a very open and honest discussion today. Diversity, fair housing is very important to me. It's very important to the leadership of BNAR. And so being diverse actually helps lift up everyone. Having a mixed community raises everyone's awareness and creates a community of love, and as opposed to having a single neighborhood of just minority people that are depressed and they continually be supplanted where they can't build up. We all know, I gotta stand up because I got a bad hip, sorry. We all know that real estate, owning a home builds wealth. And systematically across this country, because there were laws that existed, even in the NAR code, that really kept everybody separate. If you haven't been to our website, there's a great video from Dan Corbett, who is the legal counsel for Housing Opportunities Made Equal. Buffalo is the 6th most segregated city in the country. Now, I don't know how many cities there are in this country, but I'm sure there are thousands. And it was through systematic segregation that we are now where we are today. We talk about equity, treating everyone equal. Everyone wants to be treated equally. And then we talk about inclusion, or in this case, being invisible. So we met with this woman. Are you back there?
I'm back here.
Okay. So you were in the corporate world for how long?
30 years.
30 years. And were you the only person of color in that firm?
Yes.
So when you would have a meeting, tell the group what would happen.
Well, when we would have meetings, it was as if I was not a part. They basically said hello, and that would be it. There were no ideas taken of mine. I was never included in any of the male activities because it was predominantly men. So the luncheons, the outings, I was never included.
So part of that invisibility was you were non-existent.
Exactly.
And you know what's interesting? Being non-existent isn't just for a person of color. We identify diversity as, okay, I could identify someone as being black or Asian, or in my case, Italian, and they were also at some point minorities and looked upon in a negative way. But here's a woman that you graduated from UB, right?
Yes.
And you were very successful.
Yes.
And tell them what happened when you garnered a large account. What did the owner do?
Oh, well, being in the financial industry for 30 years, I had to prepare myself like everyone else. I was licensed with the Securities Exchange Commission. I was part of the National Association of Securities Dealers, and I was also licensed by the New York State Insurance Department. And many times if I had Caucasian clients, the owners would take my client from me and give it to one of the men.
So that doesn't happen like 20 years ago. That happens like now.
Yes.
Enos, you've been in the industry
21 years.
21 years. Tell us a little bit about what you've experienced from when you first started.
Well, being a young female at that time who also had an accent, obviously wasn't born and raised in this country, from a Muslim religion, I wasn't very accepted by certain peers in my own office, often discriminated by, some clients. And in many ways, it worked against me even with my own community because I was a young female who wasn't maybe smart enough in their eyes or successful enough to earn their business.
You know, when we discuss, it's not just race, it could be familiar status, it could be a whole host of things. And we unconsciously sometimes make judgments. I got it, it's okay. We sometimes unconsciously make judgments. So I'm gonna tell you a little story. I'm working for General Electric, and I'm at a conference in Las Vegas, and I'm waiting for my plane to come in from from California. I'm going on to Denver. And get on the plane, and the passengers that were going to Denver stayed on the plane. And I'm sitting in the bulkhead behind first class, and there were two women, and they're sitting down, window and aisle, and window and middle, and I had the aisle seat, and they're eating burgers, and the food's just dropping, and they just look so, frankly, disgusting to me. I prejudged. So I sat in my chair and I went like this. I put my back to them. And I put my sunglasses on. People do this all the time. By the time we landed in Denver, I loved Ruby. She was the one sitting next to me. And this is 30-something years ago. She had the whole front of the plane laughing. And we, unfortunately, look at somebody with a different accent, a woman. Women today are still supplanted. The only reason we have WCR is because our industry was all white men. And probably back in the late 60s is when WCR was created. And there was a reason for that. And still today, women are looked down upon. But can you imagine being a minority woman? A woman that is different from everybody else?
Women weren't allowed on the board of BNAR, so that's why Women's Council of Realtors was created.
Nanette, Are you from Buffalo?
I am.
Tell us a little bit about background, please.
Well, I am, okay. I think I can carry without it.
Yeah, I think so.
Nanette Massey, I am originally from Buffalo, New York. My class was the first class that started in 5th grade, the year study honors was created. So the class that I was in went from 5th to 12th. You can't hear me? Okay. The class that I was in went from 5th to 12th. I did go to a different high school though. I do workshops. I do workshops that I call Moving Beyond White Fragility, Honest and Effective Conversations About Race. And what I do is I take the ideas in, how many of you have read that book? How many of you have heard of the book? Okay. What I do is I take ideas in that book and I turn them into concrete stories about, about my real life as a Black person. The theme was feeling invisible. And I used to work, my early background is in sales. And my first corporate sales job was, I worked for a company called Nynex. And I think a lot of people in this room are old enough to remember that company. I'm always surprised young people go, who? Nynex used to be. And I sold cell phones. This was when cell phones were still a business-to-business sale. This was before, 13-year-olds were texting LOL. And I found that one of the skills that I had to learn to develop, being Black and being a woman in the corporate world, was I had to learn to anticipate and manage white men interrupting me. And how many of you women can relate to men interrupting you constantly? Help me out, sisters. Come on. Thank you. Yeah. But I would be in a meeting and I was talking and one of the white men would just talk right over me.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd just be standing there like, was I just talking or was I imagining I was talking? Because this person just started talking like I'm not even here. And like I said, that happened. At first I used to, shrink back. I figured, this is my first corporate sales job. I haven't been at this long enough. Maybe what they're saying is more important. Then after a while I realized, no, they're just interrupting me because they can. And like I said, I've had a skill that I've had to learn is to anticipate and I was running and I was late this morning and my brain is still somewhere else. How do you get there and you're not really there? So I'm really trying. But so what I've learned to do is someone will be talking, like I'll be talking, and then a white man will interrupt me, and I'll just go, "Excuse me, Bob," and then blah 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 blah, and keep talking and keep talking and keep talking. And I've learned that sometimes what they're talking about is off the subject. I interrupt them by bringing it back to the subject. I worked for years as a live-in nanny when I was younger. And I had three kids, and 2 boys and 1 girl. And the girl was the oldest. And the little boys talked over her constantly. They constantly interrupted her. And I sat her down one day and I said, honey, you can't let that happen. You have to learn to, say, hey, I was talking. I said, not just as a kid, when you get older and you get 15 and 16 and, men are interrupting you and not listening to you. That's a skill you need to develop now.
Thank you, Nanette. If you have any questions, raise your hand or shoot up one of the file cards to us. I want to have Brennan talk a little bit about why isn't invisibility of race talked about? And Brennan did his master's thesis on invisibility. So what's your take on that? And you, as the only white man up here, do you feel a little discriminated against? Well, there's John Leonardi too.
What was that all about?
You're the moderator.
Yeah, first of all, I do not feel discriminated against at all. And I think it's an interesting point about how our identities show up in different ways, right? We all, we're not just one thing. I'm not just a white man, right? And you're not just a Middle Eastern woman, right, for example. But we're both Muslim. You wouldn't know that by looking at me or make that assumption. I don't experience Islamophobia in America the same way that you might, or someone who would wear hijab or headscarf would. So the way that we show up, our intersectional identities and how all those things that make us the best who we are, right? Those things that are important to us also can be used against us in society, and especially in real estate, and that's what fair housing is all about. But I will talk a little bit about the master's thesis that I did. I went to UB, got a master's in urban planning, and looked at comprehensive planning documents, the documents that are the foundational planning documents that create the policies, the visions. They're really comprehensive planning documents more than policy. It's like an aspirational vision for this is the community that we are and that we want to have. But if you look at planning documents from Buffalo to Niagara to Rochester to Syracuse, Utica, and then all across the United States, not just New York, what often happens is that race is invisible, right? And if it shows up at all, it shows up in the demographic section. And it's pretty brief. It's like, here are the people that we count. But before we acknowledge that, we'll talk about here is the age spread, because we're looking as the population growing or shrinking. What's the family size, the job opportunities, and race is usually a footnote. If you talk about the history of a place, right? It starts with, well, this area was settled in 18 blah, 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 blah. Well, what about before that? Who are we leaving out in that way? And so when we think about these visioning documents that set the tone, set the vision for policy moving forward in an area, in a place of which, there's property that you all sell to people who want to live in that place, right? If whiteness is left out as the invisible norm, right? So maybe we mentioned other demographics, whether it's racial or otherwise, in the demographic section, but what that means is that whiteness then becomes the norm, the unspoken and unwritten norm by which everything else is measured. As a white person, I've lived my entire life as that being true. And I imagine some of you, who are white folks in the audience, may not have had to think about your identity as a white person, what it means to be white, what white culture is, what white institutions are. I'll use GRAR as an example, but I'm sure it's true of this association as well. The institutional culture of the association, by default, is probably white. And what does that mean, right? A person of color who is a part of the association might be able to tell you very quickly what that means, because they've had to study it, learn it, identify with it, right? In order to succeed and survive. But for us, and I'm talking about white folks, we're pretty ignorant to that. And that's not a bad thing, that's not a shame thing or a blame thing. We've just never had to think about it. And so now we have an opportunity to think about it and to be in relation with others and with ourselves, right? And my value as a white person up on this panel is that I can talk to other white people about what it's like to be white, right? We can all identify with that. And so naming it, having these conversations around DEI, as uncomfortable as they may be sometimes, are really important so that we can just have an opportunity to make space. That's what it's about really at the end of the day, is making space. And equity is a really important piece in this, right? And you mentioned equity and equality. There's a bit of a distinction in that equality, right? We treat everybody the same. That's what the fair housing laws demand of us, right? Your obligation as a realtor is to treat everybody the same. The challenge there is that if we have existing conditions of inequality because of structural and historical practices that have brought us to where we are, if we continue to treat everybody equally with a smile and with dignity and with the utmost respect, it will only perpetuate the inequality that currently exists. And so that demands of us to get creative and treat people in a way that furthers access and affirmatively furthers fair housing, for example. I'll stop there because I've been talking for a little bit, but yeah.
Enos, prior to this, we were talking. Tell the story about one of your coworkers when you walked behind somebody.
So I did work at an office while I was a realtor, and naturally I attracted clients from different ethnic backgrounds. It might be because they felt a little more uncomfortable with me, possibly. Maybe because I understood the different culture or was more tolerant to it than some of my colleagues in the office. But there was one specific agent who constantly would drop remarks and things of that nature. But the thing that bothered me the most is when my clients used to come in the office, that's when our clients came in the office before I put the sign. He would walk behind my client as they were approaching the conference room and and literally go like this because he thought they smelled because of whatever culture they come from and foods they like to eat and so forth. And it was a constant, behavior. So yeah, it was one of the reasons I actually decided to make a change, because I felt that even though everybody in the office used to see it, and I did approach management at that time, yes, he was talked to, but that was about it.
So Nanette mentioned how she had to change her focus and overcome when white men would interrupt her. What did you have to do, Enos, when you were dealing with people saving money, 3 families maybe living together, just to buy a home, and what would happen to them? They on a call in the office, how would some of your fellow agents treat them?
Yeah. So obviously at that time we used to also do floor time quite often. So calls used to come in the office, and obviously we spent more time in the office because we didn't work as virtual. And I used to hear the phone calls that used to come in and how some realtors would respond to anyone who maybe has an accent on the phone, whether it's an accent that is obvious from another country or, forgive me for saying, from another skin color. And how fast they wanted to rush a client off the phone, not interested in converting that customer or spending their time and effort to understand them, to help them. I've had actually agents in the office write a name and number on a piece of paper and give it to me and say, here, you take this one.
So the goal really is to move the needle just a little bit, to become more aware. To our guests back there, how you doing?
I am well.
How many nights did you go home crying?
Oh, I put it like this. Many days I was very frustrated, and sometimes I would be at the point of tears, but very frustrated.
Do you want to come out?
If you like.
Would you please become visible? So 30 plus years in the corporate world, 30 plus years in the corporate world, and Ruby is no longer invisible. And we are so proud of you and you, Enos. Every day this still goes on. And we just need to move the needle, the awareness of how we're hurting people. Not just that one family that we're steering to a certain neighborhood, but generationally, because what builds wealth? Real estate, owning a home. And Enos was telling me how individuals are saving money just to try to buy their first home and they're looked down upon because they don't speak, they don't look like what a typical American white man would look like, or a woman. Brenda?
John, I want to point out too, we're talking a lot about skin color, but there are other protected classes, LGBTQ communities, veterans, as John had mentioned, also the disabled community. We're working with People Inc. to talk to people who have trouble physically navigating places. So that's an important distinction too. I do have a question for Nanette, because sometimes it's the smallest things that make the biggest impact. And Nanette shared a story with me about shopping for a vacuum, of all things.
Yeah. So I bought I came back here in 27, I was living in Atlanta for 25 years. And I came back here in 2017, my mother left me some property. My intent was to flip it and get the heck out of here before the first snow. That was some time ago. My joke is my mother is still controlling my life from the grave. So, honestly, she's doing a pretty good job. I've been doing very well since I've come back to Buffalo. And, so I needed to buy, I went and bought a vacuum cleaner. I needed a whole bunch of stuff really quick. So when you need a lot of stuff really quick, you tend to buy low end, because you got to spread your money out. So I bought this low end vacuum cleaner from Walmart. It's a big brand, but it's a low end part of the brand. And it just does not have enough power. It just, you have to run over the same spot like 6 times just for it to be 75% picked up. So, when I do my workshops, what I like to do is I like to get an idea of who's going to be in the room, what their background is, and where their blind spots might be. Because I don't want to just stand there talking because I like the sound of my voice. What I want to do is I want to give people what they need when they're walking away. When they're done with me. So I was saying to Brenda, it's as if I think about going to a vacuum cleaner store because this low-end vacuum cleaner isn't doing it for me. So I walk in the store and the salesperson assumes right away that I'm black, I don't have a lot of money, and the salesperson is pitching me the low-end vacuum cleaner. And he's really thinking he's doing me a favor. When what I'm looking for is something that has more power and is reasonably priced. And if it does what I need it to do, I'm happy to pay whatever that costs. So I walk out of the store and he's standing there. I did everything they taught me in training. Why didn't that happen? We were literally speaking 2 different languages. He wasn't talking to my needs, And so so everybody loses. I don't have a vacuum cleaner. He doesn't have a sale.
And on top of that, you don't have the vacuum cleaner. He doesn't have a sale, and those prejudices become more and more ingrained.
And cost him money.
Yes. Ines, you want to make a point?
Cost him a commission.
Yeah, I back up this with, when we are working with clients from different cultures, different accents, specifically, and this is how this whole conversation started, all the refugees who, are seeking a better life in this country and are working hard, they're working double jobs, they're saving money, and all we have to do is really just try to understand their wants and needs, like you said, not make assumptions, understand their family dynamics, not be judgy, because yes, they may have mom and dad still living with them because that's the culture. They may have kids of school age or who are about to be engaged and get married and still live with them. And not be judging about any of that, and just listen to their wants and needs and work on giving them the best service possible to make that American dream really possible for them in home ownership. And that is our job, to your point. Thank you.
Ruby Williams, our friend from behind the curtain. Thank you so much for being here. Curious about what you went through when you were feeling very invisible in the financial advisory world, and then you shifted to a real estate career. Was it different, Ruby, or do you still feel like you're encountering a lot of those same feelings of bias and prejudice?
Good question. I'm glad to be here today, and I'm glad we're having this conversation because this has been a question in my mind for a number of years. Being in the financial industry, starting out, I worked for a large company, Mutual of Omaha, and I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with that name. And I was thinking about this. John said that when we had the tech meeting, he said, as a realtor, you wake up every morning unemployed. I'm like, darn. So for 30 years, I woke up every morning unemployed. All right, I had to depend on me totally being accepted by the people that I met. I worked as a pension specialist where I invested people's money for retirement. I worked in all of the schools in Western New York and the SUNY system. So that meant I talked with teachers, administrators, department heads, they all knew me. So my question though was, how do I teach my people about investing? How do I teach my people about saving, about life insurance? So, all right, 30 years later, real estate. Why? Because I taught them that stocks and real estate were two things that were going to help them during inflationary times. So I was still dealing with the same type of people, same mindset. How do I feel today? Sometimes invisible. Even though I'm surrounded by women, I'm still invisible. I'm the type of person, I like poetry. And I sing, and I would travel, and people loved me. I went to China, and you're talking about being a minority. I had to go 6,000 miles to be treated like a rock star. Everybody was taking pictures. Because we were a group of at least 10 African Americans that they were not accustomed to see. And we all said, man, we had to come 6,000 miles to be treated like rock stars. We go to Dubai. Now, you're really treated different. The men sat in the hotel drinking tea and talking and ignored the women, ignored us. They had so much money. We said, we want to get a cab to go to the souk to shop. He goes, cab driver, mind you. Oh no, we don't want to deal with the traffic. You come to America, they'll be hopping to take you on a shopping trip, okay? So I'm saying these things because we're talking about differences. And the more we travel, the more I learn to appreciate everybody. I think about Michael Jackson, since we talked about this. He said, I learned that we all have biases. We all do, me included. I know how I feel about you. I know how I feel about foreigners. I know how I feel about everything. And I thought about Michael Jackson. He said, in order to make that change, he said, start with the man in the mirror. Start with the man in the mirror. That's you and me. We have to start with ourselves, and we have to admit we all have biases. We have all experienced it in some shape, form, or fashion. I was listening to a speaker, and she said, diversity is nothing more than an invitation to come in. Thank you for the invitation to come in. But then she said equity. So we talk about equity. So we have the invitation to come in. So she says diversity is like being invited to the dance. But equity is like being asked to the cabin. So equity is meaning meet me where I am. I want to be successful at real estate. So what can you do to help me become successful? Then inclusion. Include me in the conversations that's going to affect me as a realtor. I was listening to Shirley Chisholm and she said, if there's not a chair for me at the table, she said, bring a folding chair. So that's where I am. I want to sit at the table. I want to be a part of the process that's going to make real estate business successful for the generations coming behind. How many young millennials, Generation Z, are trying to become realtors? Can they afford to become a realtor? Can African Americans afford what it costs to become a realtor? This is an expensive industry. The financial industry is an expensive industry. When you start thinking about E&O, continuing ed, and all, it keeps ramping up. And the only thing that gives me consolation is I can write it off. Does this make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so I don't want to take up a lot of your time, but I want you all to read Ralph Ellison's book or poem about From the Invisible Man. And then I thought of Paul Laurence Dunbar when he wrote, I wear the mask. I wear the mask. And I thought about William Shakespeare who said, the whole world is a stage. And I'm tired of being an actor.
Very powerful words. Brendan, I want to bring it back to you for a moment about what you're doing specifically in the housing market when it comes to steering, redlining, talking to realtors of a different color, different religion, different persuasion. Do you find that people look and say, I'm not interested, or they'll roll their eyes or sort of give you lip service? What's the reaction then?
So in the reaction to the work that I've been doing, and for a little bit of background, my position at GRAR is very new, the Greater Rochester Association of Realtors. I started in January. To my knowledge, when I started, it was the first dedicated staff position to fair housing in a real estate association in the state. So kind of building from square one or square zero. But there's two tracks that I focus on. One is the consumer, right? Fair housing for the people that we are trying to serve, who are our clients, but also the membership, right? I'm a staff at the association, which is all about members. And figuring out ways in which, what is the history of the association? Who has historically been able to be a member? Who has held positions of leadership? How has the association operated? And who hasn't, right? Identifying that and then owning our history and being intentional about creating opportunities and supports to be able to bolster our inclusion efforts, right? So I'm the staff liaison to the Fair Housing and Diversity Committee, and under that committee, we created a system of self-governing caucuses within the association. So 2 or more members can come together and say, we'd like to, organize a group around an identity, an affinity, or a topic, and we're going to be self-governing, and they can write their own kind of description of what they'd like to do to create some more institutional supports around different groups of realtors. It's a competitive business. You're all independent contractors, more or less, and being able to come together and have the space, again, talking about space, to talk about your experiences, right? Whatever those experiences may be, how you've navigated problems in the past without that air of competitiveness. So we've got a Black caucus, an LGBTQ plus, an Allies caucus, and we're I think storming and forming a Latino caucus as well, and those have been well received by many of the membership, certainly by the people who are looking to join those caucuses for the first time, feel seen, right? That's the biggest part, feeling seen. The interesting part, talking about reactions, is the negatives, right? The pushback that I've gotten, and that often comes from kind of perceived grievance or discrimination. I had a very prominent broker owner email me this morning about the Black Caucus and say, I'd like to join the Black Caucus, white broker. And in my email response, I said, I'm glad you're interested in the caucuses and you seem to be interested in what your expertise and your value could bring to support the caucus. The caucus at this time is really seeking membership who identify as Black. His response was, like others, well, I don't agree with how that, and this also may be an opinion held by some of you, and that's okay, but this idea of, well, that feels like discrimination, that feels kind of, we're segregating now, and that, we're trying to get away from that, so why would we do that? But the reality of giving people the space to talk amongst themselves, right? Talk without the worry or fear that there might be someone in the room who just doesn't get it, and if we've all, no matter what identity you are, I'm sure you've had an experience at some point in your life when you shared something maybe hurtful or an experience that you had with someone and they explained it away. And said, oh no, well that's not really this. Or they tried to tell you that your experience that you were having wasn't the experience you thought you had, right? And so that's why I think it's important to create those insulated spaces that can then be cooperative and collaborative in other ways, but also creating opportunities to leadership, pathways to leadership to the board, to committee chairs, so that people can hold those positions of power and our institutions and associations can become more diverse. So those are some of the things that I'm working on. I can talk about education a little bit later, but I'll leave it now.
John talks about moving the needle even a little, and so hearing about the sub-caucuses, Brendan, I think is really a good step in the right direction. Does anybody have any questions in the audience? Miriam?
I have a comment, question, something. So, being of our ilk, we were raised by, people that had come out of World War II and people that had been, in all different ways in all different parts of the world. If you do global, you see what was happening in the 30s and 40s across the entire globe. And there's a certain way that people speak, and they don't understand because people say, "Oh, it's fine. I don't have any biases, but I understand." Okay, so that's the first thing. But I remember one of my first years as a manager, and this is going back a little over 30 plus years, and someone I said, asked one of my agents, how did it go, and very, very nicely said, oh, we got the deal, I chewed him down. And I stood there, not knowing what to say. And then I realized I had to say, that makes me a little uncomfortable. But there's just things that are just, there's sayings, there's things that you heard from your parents and your grandparents. And I think knowing that it's not wrong, because it's not wrong, that was then, it was never right, but it wasn't wrong. Do you know what I'm saying? It was like sort of neutral. And now we have to kind of Archie Bunker, if you don't know, we have to undo that. And so I think that taking every step to very nicely be able to acknowledge is the way that we have to go to have everyone understand. That makes sense? There's just certain ways that people they're not doing it on purpose, but that's what they've grown up with, and we need to reframe that.
Yeah, no, it makes perfect sense. And in fact, very timely, tomorrow I'm having a conversation with my board, about the exact same thing. Because around the development of my role and the things that I'm talking about, some of the board members were like, can we even call it a Black Caucus? Is that okay? Can we do that? And because there's a lot of anxiety around language, and language evolves, and we grew up speaking one thing, and I think a really important example right now is the term Latinx, right? And within the Latino community, there is not a consensus on that being an okay or preferred term, right? Some people like Hispanic, some people like Latino, Latina, or Latinx, right? Latinx is the gender neutral term. And we have to make space, again, making space, for it to be okay to mess up. For it to be okay to say, I am going to put my foot in my mouth because I'm going to do that. I probably have done it at least once in this conversation already. But being able to make space for uncomfortable growth and learning, being like, I don't know what the most appropriate thing is to say. And that's okay. And then if I'm glad that in your example you said, that made me uncomfortable. So if someone says something that's inappropriate in front of you, and even if it doesn't affect you directly, be brave enough to say, I don't know if we should be saying that, or maybe that's not the best thing to say. That kind of didn't make me feel great. Right? It doesn't have to be mean or confrontational, but that's what interrupts, right, those implicit biases that we all have. You can forgive yourself for the first thought that comes to your mind, and even if you say it out loud, but what's that second thought? What's that third thought that then reinforces or combats whatever that bias might be? right? So making space for things to be okay to be uncomfortable. And we're always learning. Having a learner stance, I think, is really, really important.
But, you know, to on the receiving end of that, I can tell you that there are people who, like you said, just, you know, may say something or do something unintentionally, then they don't mean to hurt you or disrespect you. On the receiving end, you can tell, and you can also tell when it's meant to be hurtful. So yes, on the receiving end, I can tell you I'm more forgiving when I can tell it's not meant to hurt me. And it depends on how comfortable I am with that person. I might say, hey, like, don't say it like that, or don't do that, or that could be offensive. If you do it to somebody else, they may not like it. So educating people, like, we have the responsibility to also educate people that if they don't know better, to help them understand and learn. But when someone means it in a hurtful way, it's definitely received that way.
Yeah, but I still address it.
Yeah.
Can you close up your house?
Of course.
You gotta realize though, this is a generational shift, right? This is not, we can't just turn the switch, right? We all grew up in certain households with certain foods and certain thoughts. Our parents had certain feelings and would say certain things. And again, we just gotta move the needle a little bit. There was a African American agent 4 weeks ago, goes to an open house. The listing agent happens to be white. There's other people in the house. The listing agent follows this black agent throughout the whole house. He's like, what are you doing? I'm vaccinated, shows a vaccination card. Here's my real estate card. Following them all through the house. This is 4 weeks ago in 2021. And the reason we're having these discussions is because it shouldn't happen anymore. You know, the world, while it's upside down right now, we're coming hopefully out of this pandemic, people are just like crazy. People are mean today. I mean,
Because it's fear, and fear turns to anger because you don't want to say you're scared of it.
but you have to say something. You know the signs in New York State, or if you go to the airport, you see something, say something. If someone is verbally attacking someone of color or putting someone else down, regardless of what their race is, you gotta be brave enough to stand up and say, wait a minute, let's slow this train down. What did you actually mean? And it's hard. Talking about race, being a white guy with a lot of white people is hard. I've never lived in a black man's shoes, right? How many people look at so my wife works for this big real estate company, and they have similar caucuses, and this high-level VP for this company she works for is part of this black caucus. She lives in a very wealthy neighborhood in Atlanta, and she said she worries every time her son goes out because he's a young black man. And she tells me this story, I'm getting chills thinking about it. She's fearful of his life. There was an incident a year ago. Now I'm retired Army. A black young lieutenant at a gas station was pulled out of his car at gunpoint because he looked like someone the police thought stole a car. He was fearful for his life. He's, don't shoot me. Here we are in 2021 still talking about this. And it's hard, again, because of this generational learning and processes growing up as a kid. Right?
I guess, speaking of generational things that improve and change for generations, I was just sitting when you were talking about the phrase Jew down, and we were talking about generations and things working themselves out of our psyche over generations. I was thinking of how when I was young, it was really common in Buffalo to tell Polish jokes. So, So that's, what I'm saying is black people, we have our things too, you know. There are 3 points I want to make, and I'm going to try to keep it brief. Tell me your name again? Brennan was talking about separate spaces, like the Black Caucus and things like that. Going back to the book White Fragility by Robert DiAngelo, I highly recommend you read it. Her book is all about the conversation about race is still so based on white people's comfort. Yeah. So black people, as we're walking around, non-white people, I should say, a lot of our energy goes into not making white people uncomfortable. You know, because we need to do that to survive, we need to do that to get clients, get our kids into this school or that school. So when it comes to affinity spaces and groups are really about, okay, this is one place where I can just be myself. I'm not having to play a role and do it the way that other people think is the only way to do it. And that's what these groups are for. It's so that, like, you know, say you work in an office and all the black ladies, they sit together at a table during lunch and they slap each other and they go ahead, girl, and they're loud. That's 1 hour a day where they can do that and not be perceived as unprofessional, confrontive, you know, and all of that kind of stuff. So that's what affinity spaces are for. You know, that's a space where, like I said, you know, black women can say, girlfriends, you know, and not have to feel like, oh, that's so unprofessional. She doesn't have to explain herself, she's just being. That's what these spaces are for. I talked about having to learn to navigate white men interrupting me in meetings, and you can relate to that, I'm sure, Ruby. And I always tell people are always looking for, you know, what can I do about racism? What can I do right now? What's something I can do right now? And one of the things that I tell people is, especially white men, first you want to own your white privilege. Don't be scared of it. Own it. Because once you own it, you get to determine how it operates in the world. You get to determine that. You get to determine how to spend that currency. So, like I said, people are always asking me, Nanette, what can I do? What can I do? I tell them one of the things you can do right away is notice how often your non-white coworkers get interrupted in the meeting by white men. And take your privilege, the capital of your whiteness, the capital of your privilege, and say, you know, tell me your name again? Brennan. Brennan, you know what? Brendan was really on to something. Can we come back to you? Brendan, what was that? What you have done is you have let Brenda know that you are somebody who she can count on in this work environment. And so now she has an ally, and you know, now she's able to do her idea, for people to see her as smart. Maybe she gets a promotion later on. You know, and that was all because you spoke up for her. And that's something that you can do without, you know, everybody's interrupting. You guys are all racist. You can take your capital and just go, Enos, hold that for a minute. What you saying? We'll get back to you. Just do that. I can't tell you how powerful that is. I can't tell you how many people have said to me, you know, just somebody standing up for me. You know, whether the situation worked out or not, just that that person stood up for me. Last thing, the topic is feeling invisible. And one of the places I often feel invisible is in conversations about race with mostly white people. I'm glad that today we're having, white people are having more honest conversations about race, but too often the conversation is all about themselves having just discovered they're white. And what that means, you know. So their focus, oftentimes white folks' focus isn't on how do I be different so that it benefits the non-white people in my space. It's just all about them, like I said, discovering their whiteness. And so some of the comments that white people will make, you know, like, this is a therapy session, people. You know, we are not a whetstone. You know what a whetstone is? It's a stone you sharpen knives against. We are not a whetstone for you to sharpen your lives with. We're real people. So if you're gonna get into, I have an example. I said I was gonna keep this short. I was at a church once where this white group was showing the movie Black Panther. And they were, it was all white people and one guy with a PhD in philosophy, and he was leading it. And we were talking about Black issues. And I was saying that I feel like watching so many unarmed Black people get shot. I said, for me, that feels like what it must have been like in the 50s and 40s, having people you know getting lynched. And Mr. PhD in philosophy, he goes, no, I don't think it's like lynching. I think blah, 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 blah. I'm just like, okay, I'm the Black person in this room. Can we take it for granted that just for an hour I'm the expert on what a Black person would be thinking? How are you gonna dismiss me? I'm telling you about. So like I said, I'm glad that white folks are coming around to really talk about and think about diversity, equity, racism, and all of that. But I want to invite you, I want to remind you to keep your focus on how to make life better for the non-white people around you. Not just a therapy for white people, not just a therapy session for white people to come and discover themselves. I hope I made it. Yeah. I feel like a ring.
Well, unfortunately, our time is just about up. Does anybody have a question or a card that they want us to relay to the group?
So we're forming a diversity, equity, and inclusion committee, and we may even take a chapter out of Brennan's book, some caucuses. The conversation should not end now. When you leave here, be mindful of the pain that people have suffered. And being invisible is not a good place to be. No one. We need to leave here seeing everyone for who they are and accept everyone. Visibility is important to life. And at the end of the day, when you're doing your business, treat people the way you want to be treated. Build everyone up, not push people down.
I know Enos wants to make a comment.
I just like to point out that it's not just, being white is, what we're experiencing, it's being different. So whether it's a religion or a color or a background or ethnicity. And for many years, I think we get used to it. And I myself got used to it that I didn't even notice it when it was happening to me until I had a very beautiful, tall, blonde partner that some of you know who that is. And she was the one noticing what was happening and some treatments or comments that would be made that I just became used to and ignored. And she spoke up for me and made me realize it and was my ally on that. And so it's just important to remember that because we're different, no matter how we're different, we're still all humans. We all should respect each other and be tolerant of those differences and accepting. And even though I understand where you're coming from, where, you know, a few Black ladies having lunch together and being able to be themselves, we should be able to be ourselves, period.
Yeah.
Not on that round table with people like us, is what it is.
Dawn?
I just, like you said, we're having this new committee, what was it called?
Diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I think what I've gotten out of this is the only way people can change is to understand the different cultures and how you feel. You do feel a certain way, but also wouldn't it be nice, like Ines said, when someone didn't understand the way someone spoke, they just handed it off. Why? Because it is very difficult for that person to be able to say, what, I don't understand you, I don't understand you. And with different cultures and the way everyone is different, we did have once a seminar or whatever it was at a fire hall where all different ethnic people in our industry had a little booth of what they did and food, so that we all could embrace and learn. You can't change without learning the way people live their life. Whatever it is.
Ask questions, ask your peers.
And you don't know if you can ask. You can't, you have to be careful. That's what I found has changed. I feel like saying, I think I understand Black people. I would understand, I don't even know what to say anymore. You can't say Chinese or Japanese. Somebody told me you have to say Asian. I didn't know that. I don't mean to offend, but I think that would be nice for us to learn things like that.
And so I think this is where the learning comes in, and the ability to say, I don't know, and ask questions, right? Because everyone identifies in a particular way, and when we make prejudgments is when we get in trouble, right? When we assume that, you look like you could be this or that, but asking someone on a one-on-one basis, getting to know someone, asking them questions, if it comes from a genuine place, that's usually well received. Asking them, how would you identify? Let that not be the first question you ask, it's to know them first. But yes, having curiosity, right? Because we also don't want to put people in boxes, right? Because you can have, and those fairs are wonderful when you can have people from all different places of the world or ethnicities or cultures come together. That's great. But also people aren't just in those boxes, right? You could be, people express themselves in all kinds of different ways. So we don't want to put people in boxes either. It's a difficult balance, but it's a good start.
So, I agree 100% with John. I had 30 years in my other profession making people feel beautiful. So I was an account coordinator for a makeup line, and I can't even imagine. I mean, I went from store to store and I put people in a chair to make them beautiful, all types of nationalities, everything, and I took time to learn their culture, which was very fun, and that's where it was wonderful. I mean, they walked away feeling beautiful, and I didn't even get it when I became an agent, that those were going to be my clients. I just did because I wanted them to feel good. So that's your main thing. I've had many times walking from working out, sweating to Chico's, and they wouldn't even give me the time of day because they're like, they don't. So it happens to all of us, but we could understand, and good listeners. So I've been in retail my whole life. She didn't have a vacuum. The person who was taking care of her to explain that back because that person didn't listen to her. When you're gonna sell something, you have to listen to them, you need to not look at who they are. So it happens to everybody, but we all need to learn, because the generation coming up now are not listeners.
Well, and I think awareness is key, and that's what we're trying to do today, is move that needle even just a little bit. Julia, I'm sorry, we've got to cut it off, but we can talk informally afterwards.
I just wanted to thank the panel. I mean, we're very brave, and thank you so much for doing this. It was really, it's very difficult. It's very difficult, but it was absolutely necessary. So thank you very much.
And thank you for your
Thank you,
help.
everybody.
Thank you, Shalia, for opening the conversation too. Thank you to Ruby Williams, Nanette D. Massey, Edith Lackey, and Brendan Thompson. Thank you all so very much for your time and attention. And John Lee and Meredith.